let's rank the best quarterbacks the Niners have had since 1979, starting with the best of all time, which clearly is Steve Young. Just kidding. But I'm a Steve guy.
Hold on.
Yeah.
We're going to say number 1 is Joe and number 2 is Steve. Can we make an argument that Steve is better than Joe, or is it useless? Because let me say one thing, Iggy. Steve thinks he was better than Joe.
I think Steve's a better athlete than Joe. I think you could do more with Steve as a play caller.
Yeah.
I think he had a better arm. I think he was faster. I think he was bigger. Joe had legendary moments of spontaneous genius, and we're going to come back to that phrase a little later. I don't know that Steve had the spontaneous genius that Joe had under the highest of the pressure situations. You'd have to tell me. But in terms of just like physical skill sets, it's Steve.
Yeah. First of all, Joe won 4 Super Bowls.
Correct.
He did. Steve won 1.
He did.
So I think that puts Joe
But
ahead.
if Steve had gotten to play in his 20s on that team like Joe did, I didn't ever see Joe play. I wasn't.
If Steve, you can't do the if. He didn't.
You can't.
You can't do the if.
You can't do the if. All right, let's go Joe 1. Let's go Joe 1.
Okay, Joe 1. What Joe had for me, he had 2 things over Steve. 1, Steve was, I would call, an emotional quarterback, hot. And I think that he would get real worked up before games. He's a passionate guy, and I think it worked against him.
Almost like a safety.
Yes.
Yeah, almost like John Lynch. Yeah.
Joe is almost, you get the feeling when he walked onto the field, someone stripped emotion from his personality. That he went out
bored,
disconnected, and that worked his advantage.
Yeah,
and the other is, I think Joe for medium and short range passes was the most accurate I've ever seen. Perfect. Yeah. And I've mentioned this before on our broadcast. One time, Bill Walsh was watching tape of Joe because he was going to make some presentation. Joe was winning an award or something. And Bill called me and he said, Lowell, I haven't watched Joe in a long time. And I was sitting here today watching his tape. He said every pass was exactly where it had to be. And there was, what was in his voice was love. Love.
Yeah. Okay, so let me be Steve Young's lawyer here, advocate, because someone has to argue on his behalf. Yeah, Joe was great. Joe was accurate. You know who had a higher completion percentage than Joe Montana?
Steve. Yeah.
Steve was great. Steve was very accurate. And one thing that's cool about Joe, I feel like, since he wasn't the most physically gifted quarterback, the legend, as time goes on, people think like, oh, he was little and he couldn't throw downfield at all. I went back and watched his 50 greatest plays of his career on YouTube. It's about 10 minutes. He was a good athlete. He didn't have a weak arm. I mean, he could really put the ball down the sideline to Jerry Rice if the defense dared him to. So I think he deserves a little credit for his athleticism too. Joe.
Yeah.
Joe.
So I want to just point out, you were going to be Steve's advocate.
Yeah, but then I went over to Joe. Sorry about it.
Yeah.
Sorry about it.
Yeah. And sorry, Steve. I mean, the fact is, when I see Joe, we're polite to each other.
Mm-hmm.
We're polite. Although the last time I was with him in person, Peter McGowan was there. Poor Peter died. And I was chatting with Peter McGowan, and Joe came over with Jennifer. And he just started talking to Peter McGowan like I wasn't even there. And finally, and didn't introduce me to his wife. So I finally interrupted the conversation. I said, "Hi, Jennifer, I'm Lowell Cohn." And she sort of, "Oh, you're Lowell Cohn." And we shook hands. So I don't know if Joe doesn't know better or if all these years later, he still doesn't want to know from me. Whereas when I see Steve, we give each other a hug. It's a warm guy.
Steve's a warm guy. Dad, Steve in his prime, Joe at his prime, which quarterback do you think Al Davis would have wanted?
Oh, I know. In fact, it came to that. It was Steve. What happened was Bill was always playing with the idea of trading Joe. Mm-hmm. Bill never could pull the trigger for a long time. And it was Seifert who pulled the trigger.
Right.
And that's why Joe hates Seifert. But
If you go back and look, Joe won the Super Bowl in '84. Then he had, I think, 3 first-round exits in the playoffs in a row after that. I mean, it wasn't going so well in the late '80s until, it did. But anyway, go ahead.
So Bill called Al Davis. They had a very strange relationship. They knew each other very well. They sometimes socialized, but I don't think they really liked each other. Or I'll say, I don't think Bill liked them as much as Al liked him.
I do believe that Bill coached for Al, like on the Raiders, a long time. So there was a relationship. Yes.
But then he wouldn't pay him enough. Right. And so Bill left. And coached a semi-pro team.
Correct. Right.
So, okay.
The Apaches?
He sent the Apaches, San Jose Apaches.
Okay.
And later on, Al used to rub that in public.
Yeah.
The guy coached the minor league team. So he sent tape of Joe Montana to Al Davis.
Yeah.
Al looks at it and calls him back. He says, look, Bill, I don't want him. I don't want Joe Montana. My wide receivers will outrun his arm. That's what he said. Because what Al wanted was the bomb, the one big play, and really fast receivers. And Joe could not get it. According to Al, Joe could not get it down there fast enough. So Joe said, but I'll tell you what, I'll trade you for Steve Young. And Bill said, no way. No way. So that really, I know for a fact that really did happen.
So what does that mean? If Bill was willing to trade Joe but not Steve, Steve was 3, 4, 5 years younger, but still, what does that mean?
I know Iggy, it's intriguing.
And you never got a straight answer out of Bill on that one, did you? No one ever did.
I asked him one time who was your best quarterback, and he said, all I say on that subject is Steve is the best athlete I ever had as a quarterback. That's how he kind of weaseled it, right?
Yeah, but it sounds like he's partial to Joe. Al would have been partial to Steve. Okay, there's a debate there. Let's go to number 3. Unless you got something else you want to say about those two.
What it says is you could say who's the greatest quarterback, but then you have to add, if you're sophisticated, for which team and which system.
Correct. And I think the correct answer is that those 2 quarterbacks are 2 of the 10 best quarterbacks ever.
Oh, God.
2.
And Joe may be the best.
Joe may be the best. Steve, there are so many quarterbacks I would take Steve Young over. Like Drew Brees, all-time great quarterback, give me Steve. Aaron Rodgers, all-time great quarterback, give me Steve.
I agree.
Yep.
Oh, I agree.
Even Peyton Manning, all-time great quarterback, I think I'll take Steve.
Yeah.
That's just me, though. That's just me. His numbers aren't there. He didn't play until he was 30, but he was just as accurate as any of those quarterbacks I just mentioned with mobility.
Yeah. And he was a real winner. He was a real winner.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Number 3.
Number 3.
Hold on. I'm thinking as fast as I can. I'm going to have to say Jeff Garcia, number 3, in this time span. What would you say?
Absolutely, Jeff Garcia. Jeff Garcia, for 3 years, 2000, 2001, 2002, was a top 10 quarterback for sure in the NFL, borderline top 5. He was up there with Peyton Manning, Brett Favre, Kurt Warner. He was in that class at that time. He was great. And he was like Bill Walsh's final gift to the organization.
Which the organization almost didn't appreciate.
No, they ran him out of town after one down season. Goodbye. And they still haven't replaced him. He's the last Pro Bowl quarterback they've had.
And I want to tell you something else, Iggy, because I covered, obviously, when Garcia was the quarterback. That Terrell Owens hated him.
Correct. He hated every quarterback he played with.
Yeah. But here's the thing. So after games, everybody demanded that Terrell Owens would come to the podium because they knew that he would crap on Garcia, and he did it week after week. They had that other quarterback, the Rat, they call Rat something or other.
Tim Rattay.
He was saying that, and he was saying Terrell Owens after games that the Rat should be our quarterback.
Wow.
And here you have Jeff Garcia. So what I want to say is the organization did not do well by him. And I think Erickson was the coach. Erickson should not have allowed Terrell Owens to go up and say that stuff. You're not going to the podium today, T.O.
Yeah.
And, I don't get to vote for the Hall of Fame, and that schmuck made it in. from that alone, I wouldn't want him to be in because he was
never a team player. It's the ultimate team sport. He was never a team player. Like the least team player I've ever seen. I think there should be a consequence for that. Anyway.
Well, I wouldn't have voted him in.
I wouldn't have either, even though he was a me guy, not a team guy. End of story.
Yeah.
End of story, deal breaker. He was great when he was young and Jerry Rice was on the team and he kept T.O. in check. He was maybe the best number 2 wide receiver I've ever seen. But once Jerry left and T.O. became T.O., it was over.
Yeah.
He was a bad influence. Anyway, we don't need to go there. Jeff Garcia, number 3, Pro Bowl quarterback. Walsh found him. He was small like Purdy, but he was he was strong. I remember him having muscles and being, just more physically imposing than Purdy. So.
And again, he was a guy you could talk to,
Yeah.
If I asked for an appointment with him, we would sit in a room alone and talk. I don't know when this changed, that you can't sit alone with a goddamn quarterback. But Jeff Garcia I'm going to put it like this. He was a normal person. And Iggy, from me about an athlete, normal is the best adjective. It's the highest praise. Yeah.
Yeah. Alex Smith was normal.
Alex Smith. Yeah.
We'll get there. So again, with Jeff Garcia, he missed no games in those 3 seasons I was telling you about. 2003, he missed 3 games and they ran him out of town. Like, not only was he playing at an excellent level, but he was on the field playing, running, being tough, not missing games. I mean, to me, he was a franchise quarterback. And people don't remember, it was a long time ago, but he was better than Donovan McNabb. McNabb was Andy Reid's quarterback at the time. And Andy Reid won a lot of games with Donovan McNabb, who was a good quarterback. Garcia was better. He was just as mobile, if not more mobile. He was more accurate. He was better, my opinion.
Yeah. Bill Walsh did not like Donovan McNabb. I told you the line. He said, Lowell, when I watch this McNabb play, he's a different quarterback on every throw. He doesn't have the same throwing motion. I can't have a guy like that. He was very down on McNabb.
Yeah, and if you look at McNabb's numbers, he was completing 57% of his throws, 58% of his throws, while Garcia was completing 63, 64, 65. Yeah. Anyway, Garcia was underrated. They ran him out of town. Who's number 4?
Ooh, I'm tending to say Alex Smith, but you may be better at this than me. Who's the competition? Kaepernick?
We're at the Kaepernick, Alex Smith, Jimmy Garoppolo level. Which one was the best of those 3?
Well, I'm going to say Alex Smith.
I'm going to say Kaepernick. Let's make our arguments. You go first.
Okay. Could you give us some stats?
Yes. Alex Smith. Now, Alex Smith was on some bad teams, remember? So his numbers weren't great. He was on a lot of bad teams. With the Niners, he was 38-36. He completed 59% of his throws. He threw 81 touchdown passes and 63 picks. But when Harbaugh got there, those 2 years, he was 19-5 in those 2 years. He threw 30 touchdowns and 10 picks in 2 years. It's basically a season and a half. Remember, he got replaced. And he won that really impressive playoff game against the Saints and Drew Brees. He beat Drew Brees. And then he lost that heartbreaker the next week at home when Kyle Williams fumbled the twice. And then he never played again for the Niners in the playoffs. So you could argue he was very good.
And what were Kaepernick's stats?
Okay, let me get Kaepernick's stats. Now, Colin, again, he tailed off once Harbaugh left. But when Harbaugh was there for those 2 years, he was 17-6. In those years, he threw 31 touchdown passes and 11 picks. Very, very similar numbers to Alex Smith. The difference was in the playoffs, if you remember, Kaepernick was really good. He was 4-2 in his career. He had a 100 quarterback rating that first year when he went to the Super Bowl. He was just a devastating runner in the playoffs. I mean, he ran for 10 yards a carry in the playoffs, 500 yards in 6 games. He was very difficult to stop, even though he was an imperfect quarterback.
Okay. I think you've made a very good case. Let's put Kaepernick number 4.
Okay.
Yes. What were you going to say?
Last thing I'll say on Kaepernick, we talk about it a lot with Walsh. He would talk about the limit of your offense. What is the limit of your offense? I think with Kaepernick, when he was at his best for those 2 years, there was less of a limit than with Alex.
It was a higher limit. It was
yeah. Now, he never fulfilled all of his promise. There was a moment, I think, where a lot of people thought Kaepernick could be the best quarterback in the league, could become that. He never did. But the limit was, and that's why he was able to carry the Niners in playoff games in ways that Alex Smith couldn't and Jimmy Garoppolo never could, because they were limited.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why I'm going along with you. I'm putting him ahead of Alex Smith. I don't like Kaepernick, and
Fair.
I don't like him.
He was very rude to the media.
He was awful. But
Yeah.
in addition, Iggy, he brought chaos and
He did.
And rancor to the team. And it speaks very poorly of Chip Kelly. That to let that happen. Here you have a football locker room, and this guy is talking about the oppressor and, all the crap that he was talking about.
It's supposed to be about football. It's supposed to be about
some
football.
of it was probably legitimate, about police brutality. I'm not arguing about that, but you don't do it in a football locker room. Go outside in the hallway. I believe that he polarized the team, that it became more about social unrest than about football. So I tend to grade him down the way I would grade Terrell Owens down, because they were negative influences in a football locker room. But on pure performance, I guess Kaepernick is better than Alex, although I don't think Kaepernick worked hard at his craft, and I think after a while he was a substandard quarterback.
Yeah, where Alex Smith never, ever was. I mean, after he became good. That's fair.
Yeah.
But, Alex Smith's best years were with Andy Reid. How about that? After he left the 49ers.
Right. And in fact, he did very well with Andy.
He did very well with Andy Reid. Never really did much in the playoffs. He was limited. Let's talk about Alex Smith now. I think I would put, to me, so who would you put? I would put Alex Smith above Jimmy Garoppolo, because I think there's more. He was mobile. He was smarter than Jimmy Garoppolo. Like, Alex Smith could go to the line of scrimmage before the play and figure out what the defense was doing as well as any quarterback in the league not named Peyton Manning. He could do it.
I agree.
He could do it. I remember there was a game he went to Lambeau and beat Aaron Rodgers, essentially doing that. He just kept getting the Niners into the right play before the play started, and he just kept getting these long runs. It's like, hey, got to give it to Alex. Yeah.
Right. Jimmy is not a bad quarterback.
No, he's not.
Jimmy is relentlessly mediocre.
Yes. In every way.
Mediocre. Relentlessly mediocre. And I don't consider Kaepernick at his best or Alex Smith at his best relentlessly mediocre. I always think Jimmy was relentlessly mediocre.
Right. Like with Kaepernick and Smith, neither one of them turned the ball over very much. Jimmy had no conscience. Kaepernick and Smith were both mobile. Jimmy was a statue. Kaepernick and Smith both had kind of strong arms. Kaepernick especially. Jimmy didn't. So, right. I mean, and he would make those bad decisions too that you would be like, so yeah, I would have to say that Jimmy was on some really good teams. Jimmy did do some things really well. Alex was too careful. It was almost a fault. It was like, dude, you got to throw the ball.
It was a fault.
It was a fault. Like Jimmy Garoppolo, you'd never say he was too careful, right? Which is why he was actually, every time it was third and whatever, you had a chance with Jimmy Garoppolo, right?
Yes.
He wasn't just going to check it down and say, oh, sorry, like Alex Smith would, and did.
I agree.
Yeah. So Jimmy was a good quarterback. He's definitely in the pantheon of Niner quarterbacks. After him, you don't really, you got guys who didn't play very much, right? Who are we talking about?
Name some
Sean
names.
Hill, Troy Smith, Trey Lance, Brock Purdy,
Blaine Gabbert,
Tim Rattay.
Forgettable, right?
Forgettable. So there's basically 5 guys who matter since 1979. And Jimmy's one of them.
Yes, absolutely.
But now they got 3 guys in their quarterback room. Maybe all 3 of them will be in the pantheon one day, Dad.
Well, here's what I want to say. It's true they don't have anyone now that can compete with those really good quarterbacks we've talked about. But the quarterback room is better. Yeah, if you have that quarterback room.
If they combine forces.
Except I'd have to think when they had Joe and Steve in a quarterback room, That was a pretty good quarterback room. And Steve Bono in there too, who could really play. Yeah.
He won games, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, that was a pretty good quarterback. And but it's interesting. Bill never said to me, Lowell, what you need to have is a quarterback room. All the hundreds of hours we spoke, he never talked once about the quarterback room.
One more thing that Jimmy Garoppolo was mediocre at best at doing: staying healthy and playing through injuries. He did it sometimes, but other times, that's a huge requirement of a starting quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah.
Playing the game.
Yeah. Well, you know who his coach was?
That's right.